Pottery from the Jomon period has been classified by archaeologists into at least 70 different main styles. Every piece of this earthenware was made using something called the coil technique, which is when a basket is used to steady the base of a vessel, while coils of clay are piled up one layer at a time by hand. Archaeologists can tell when a particular piece of Jomon pottery was made by looking at its size, shape, and surface patterns. And the Jomon period produced some amazing shapes and patterns. For example, the earliest pottery from the Jomon period was actually bullet-shaped, with a wide mouth at the top and a tapered pointed end at the bottom. As time went on, the pottery grew in size and then dramatically changed shape. The tapered end of the bullet vessels were widened and flattened out, and by the mid-Jomon period, which was from about 2500 to 1500 BCE, the surface patterns of each vessel started to feature increasingly complex rope patterns. Meanwhile, the mouth of each vase morphed into elongated, protruding rims that arched high over the pot. These flared angular projections made these vessels look similar to the crowns worn by royalty in ancient China and Korea, which might be why archaeologists often refer to this type of earthenware as crown pottery. And it's these unglazed crown pots that the shrines in Breath of the Wild look like. But they're not the only objects in the game that resemble these unusual vases. You can see the same shape and form on a lot of things, from the lookout posts known as Sheikah towers to a special type of outfit known as ancient armor. And you can really see it when you look at creatures known as guardians. Guardians, for those who don't know, are these weird machines that patrol certain areas of Hyrule, and they like to zap you with lasers if you get too close. They're really annoying. But visually, they're cool because they look like upside-down crown pottery come to life. Even their spindly robot legs look like the ribbed water spouts you see on some ancient Jomon vessels. But if you really want to see Jomon art at its most beautiful and crazy in Breath of the Wild, look no further than the 4 divine beasts. These giant mechanical constructs are kind of like living dungeons, and in Breath of the Wild, you're tasked with fighting each one of these beasts in order to cleanse them of evil. The exterior and interior of each of these creatures looks very heavily influenced by a specific type of Jomon art called Kaen Doki, which means flame pottery. And flame pottery is one of the coolest and most unique things to come out of the Jomon era. Now, technically, the crowned pots I mentioned earlier are a part of this family of earthenware vessels, but the Kaen Doki I'm talking about are actually a lot more elaborate. The rims of these vessels are absolutely wild. They have all sorts of curly loop-de-loops, sawtoothed edges, hollow rings, and undulating borders that give the pottery a sense of dynamic movement. And the surface of these pots are covered in a series of diagonal lines, straight lines, curlicues, and wave patterns, some of which are presented in high relief. Seriously, you have to see these pots to believe them. Even the story behind their discovery is pretty interesting. The first such vessel was discovered on New Year's Eve, 1936, in a place called Umataka by the archaeologist Kodo Kanjiro and his son Tokusaburo. According to a charming story told by a fellow archaeologist, when Kanjiro and his son discovered the unusual pottery, they were so shocked by its bizarre form, they had no idea what to call it. The son just called it either Umataka after the area it was discovered in, or just that vase. The father, however, started to call it Kaen, which means flame or flames, after the flame-like protrusions decorating the top of the vessel. When other earthenware vessels were discovered with similar designs, the name Kaen Doki or flame pottery stuck. Some archaeologists think these projections really do resemble dancing flames, which would have cast crazy shadows on the walls of Jomon pit dwellings, acting as the perfect addition to stories told by the hearth fire during long winter nights. Others, however, think these protrusions are meant to represent water. And when I look at these vessels, I have to agree. Although I can see how the rim of Kaen pots resemble flames, if you look at the combination of wavy lines and curling vortexes on the surface of the pottery, then look at the rolling motion and wave-like form of the mouth of these vessels, the whole effect looks like the natural movements of water. Water in, say, a river. Which would make sense because a lot of Jomon sites were found near rivers, particularly the Shinano River Basin in northern Honshu. FYI, nobody knows for sure what these vessels were used for, but archaeologists have found traces of salmon and other types of food in them, so it's possible they were used for food storage. But not all the vases have traces of food in them, so some of them could have been used in festivals or rituals. All we know for sure is that these astounding looking pots are gorgeous. And when we study the art design for the divine beasts, with all their crazy jagged protrusions and curving joints and rings and spouts and crazy edges, we can see how the divine beasts represent flame pottery taken to its most beautiful and logical extreme. So, okay, there's a lot of isn't the only cool thing from the Jomon period to make it into the game. There's lots of cool stuff, both big and small, really small, like tiny, cool little statues small, which brings us to our next object of interest, cherry.